I presume that I went offline somewhere during the kirtan. Actually, Manu Prabhu, given that you sent me that message, can you confirm that I am online? Just so that I don't start speaking. Someone's telling me something?
Send it to mine.
Yeah, if you could send it maybe to Galoka's phone, just to confirm that I am online, because obviously if I'm not, there's not much point in continuing. So maybe I'll wait till I get that confirmation, actually. Oh, is that something? Yes, okay, thanks, Manapu. And now that it has been confirmed that I am online, I can start the blame game. So the reason I went offline was because I got a phone call halfway through the kirtan from His Holiness Abir Krishna Goswami. And I guess I didn't answer the call, of course. I just continued chanting Hare Krishna. I'll get back to him later. But I guess I'm not a technical expert, but I'm guessing that cuts the connection. The fact that somebody actually rings you. And just on that point, Manaparu, sorry, I'll get into the class now very shortly. But just on that point, that seems to be quite a lacuna as far as this system is concerned, because obviously you cannot control who may or may not be ringing you at any point in time. And if that cuts the connection, even if you don't answer the call, then, you know, that is a little bit of a complication. Anyway, notwithstanding all of that, we'll continue with our Sunday program and a little presentation. I'm not sure if it went online, but the title of the talk today is The Last Snare of Maya. And the last snare of Maya. And that was a phrase that was used by Srila Prabhupada on quite a number of occasions. And it relates to specifically, because in one sense there are many snares of Maya. So in terms of the last snare, it's referring to the trap. Because in one sense, Maya's traps, of course for most of us in the material world, the biggest trap that Maya sets us is the desire and succumbing to that desire for sense gratification, which in the material world is manifested in its highest form in relation to the attraction to sexual activity and sex life like that. Something that's very hard for us to control, or can be very hard for us to control. And it's the application of the Krishna conscious process that gives us that control. But over and above that, because there are people, many people, who have actually managed to control that desire and that activity. So the last snare of Maya is then assuming or considering or, consuming, considering, etc., surrendering to the concept that the Supreme Person is impersonal. So Prabhupada would refer to that as the last snare of Maya, people who would consider that. So most regimes, if you like, or systems, regimes, structures of Indian philosophy, they support the idea that in some way, all of us, all living beings, are one with the Supreme. So that also includes our Vaishnava Siddhanta, that we're one with the Supreme. And some would also say that spiritual philosophy in general, both East and West, is based on the premise of oneness. Now, that's interesting because if we remember Srila Prabhupada's pranam prayers, Srila Prabhupada, we talk to him or we speak of him as coming to destroy actually, impersonalism and voidism. So that's actually in Srila Prabhupada's own pranam mantras that we recite on a regular basis. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasnaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gaudavani Pacharane Nirvashesha Sunyavadi, impersonalism and voidism. So Prabhupada has come to defeat those concepts. So even in Western culture, although primarily in Western culture, you have Christian tradition, etc., and all these different traditions, but it is actually ultimately quite a impersonal view. Although having said that, Christianity does have the understanding that God is a person, but that's a whole other discussion. So East and West is based on the premise of oneness, suggesting, but what that does actually is just suggesting that there's a metaphysical or a spiritual existence. But then we have to analyze what that actually is. And one argument is that because everything, or since everything emanates from God, and that God is absolute, then his emanations, they share some of the essential nature, even if they exist in temporary forgetfulness. And this temporary forgetfulness, which is a situation that we're all in the material world, I've just been dropped a note. I just want to quickly read that note. It's something to do with the technical part of this class. All right, okay, no, that's okay. So this temporary forgetfulness, something that we're all suffering from in the material world, is actually the first philosophical challenge with the presentation of impersonalism or Advaita Vedanta. That if Brahman is the ultimate reality, and if it's one without a second, how does one account for illusion, Maya, and ignorance, avidya? So Maya and avidya, ignorance and illusion, which that already is clearly pointing to a duality in that Brahman concept. And actually the followers of impersonalism or Advaita Vedanta, they haven't really given us an answer to that question. And I don't mean, today or yesterday, I mean through the centuries. So therefore the ultimate spiritual vision, according to their philosophy, the Advaita Vedanta, dismantles all hurdles and permits one to see the apparent truth of our essential oneness with God. And that's fine, that's good. So that's presenting like that. So the question then is, how far can we take this apparent truth? Is it the ultimate reality or merely an aspect of that ultimate reality? And that's the key thing, I guess as we all grow older in life, more and more we come to the realization that generally, there can be exceptions, but generally viewing the world in a very black and white way is not helpful, because there are always various shades of grey between the black and the white. So the question is, okay, that's their presentation, but is that the ultimate reality, or is that just an aspect of the ultimate reality, obscured by superior realizations of a transcendental form of dualism? So their presentation is dualism, but is there a transcendental form of this dualism? The Vaishnava presentation is dualism, and is there a transcendental form of this dualism? So this latter view, as I say, is the conclusion of Vaishnavas, who are the devotees of God, who accept God as God's ultimate manifestation as personal, not impersonal. And that understanding is excelled by the oneness propounded by the impersonalistic philosophy or the Advaita Vedanta. So that's the question. And Vaishnavas go further. So they they go further on many levels, but right now talking about the impersonal presentations, that Vaishnavas go further, and they present that to come full circle spiritually, one must become aware of this transcendental dualism, wherein a practitioner or a follower who's practicing this path, their increased sense of oneness is surpassed by a direct relationship with the Supreme. And the simple presentation that's made by Vaishnavas is that the whole basis of a relationship, it points to the fundamental principle that it requires more than one participant. You can't really have a relationship with yourself. You probably go crazy. But even if you can have a relationship with yourself, it's not going to be a very satisfying one like that. And it's interesting, Prabhupada used to also quote the phrase, which I think is his own phrase actually. It was a very interesting phrase, that religion without philosophy is sentiment. And you can see that without getting into controversial subjects, but you can kind of see that with some of the more fanatical aspects of religion in the world that we live in, that we've been very much experiencing over the last 20 years or so. where, you know, people will literally go out and kill themselves, kill others in the name of religion. Such religion is really bereft of philosophy, actually, and it is based exclusively on sentiment. And because it's exclusively based on sentiment, it can become fanatical and extreme in how it manifests itself like that, and ultimately in the ways that I've just described. But then Prabhupada would also go on that philosophy without religion is actually speculation, mental speculation, speculation coming from our minds. And that very much, is the presentation of impersonalistic philosophy. It's presenting philosophy without religion or without sentiment. And the reason why that's important is because, yes, pure sentiment really is not where we want to go, and that has big problems. But you have to have, in the context of a relationship, you have to have sentiment. It has to be there. That's the nature of a relationship and personal exchanges. So that's the crucial thing, the dynamic of a relationship. You know, logic and religion and philosophy, they have no value without relationship. And what are the most kind of important or crucial aspects or valuable aspects of a relationship? Such things such as love and compassion and friendship. So if they're not in a relationship, then a relationship makes no sense. And if you're having an impersonal relationship, they also make no sense because you're not having that loving exchange. So the question is, for the people who present impersonal philosophy as the ultimate, is if we're all one, who are we relating to? Who is it that we're relating to, etc., and relating to us? Human nature, of course, encourages us to understand the relationship of substance and qualities, of cause and effect, of subject and origin. They're natural things once we talk about relationships like that. So we naturally want to know and understand what God's or Krishna's relationship is to this world, to the cosmic creation. It's a natural thing. Where does Krishna fit in all of this? And we want to know God's relationship to other individuals, etc. And the Vaishnava Siddhanta, or the Vaishnava Vedanta, excuse me also for during the kirtan, maybe you didn't hear it, but I had a frog in my throat, and I hope it wasn't a corona frog. But anyway, so the Vaishnava Siddhanta explains about God's relationship with the world, God's relationship with all the living entities in the world, etc. For Vaishnavas, there's no vacuum here, whereas for the impersonal presentation, there's very much a vacuum. And as I say, this is because a relationship, it requires two entities to interact. There has to be an interaction between two entities. Whereas in personalistic philosophy, the Advaita Vedanta, it requires no other. It doesn't require another. There's no entity with whom one might enter a relationship with. It's all one. The philosophy being that we're spiritual beings, and when we leave this world, if we achieve perfection and then leave this world, we merge into Brahman, and it's all one. It's just one entity then. We're just merging in. There's another big problem with this in the context of, we're effectively saying we become God, which is another discussion which I might touch on. But so we merge into it. So it's just one. It's just one entity. So there's no other to be having a relationship with. Whereas, as I mentioned, the essence of a relationship is that you have to interact. Two entities, they must be different, not just interacting, but obviously they have to be different. Because even if you clone yourself and you have a perfect clone of yourself like that, and then you have a relationship with that clone, it's not going to be satisfying. So in the same way, the complete otherness, as I've expressed, it prevents a relationship. And if we ignore that essential, I'm very sorry. I just get my thoughts clear. On the other side, if we ignore the essential oneness that exists between each of us and with God, then we're fated also to extreme isolation. While differences are important, they also should not be overstressed. So Krishna tells us in the Bhagavad Gita about everything in life, in our existence, is about balance and getting balance right. So we shouldn't focus on this. There is a oneness. We're all spirit souls. Krishna's pure spirit. So there is a oneness and a similarity. but we shouldn't overemphasize that, oh, we're all one, because there are differences, and maybe I'll talk about that later. So there are differences, but then likewise, from the other side of the coin, it's not that we should overemphasize those differences like that, because there is also similarities, because there exists between all of us a hereditary spiritual connection between all of us as children of God, essentially, like that, and a foundational connection between all living entities and the entire perceptible world, conceivable world. There's a relationship, and that world is also a manifestation coming from Krishna. So yeah, so we shouldn't overemphasize the oneness, but we also shouldn't overemphasize the difference, because the notion of difference, divulging from the truths that are missing in the impersonalistic philosophy should not be extended too far, for that also has shortcomings. Likewise, extending the differences has shortcomings. And actually, just on the point of extending the differences, I'll give an example, which I think is a very good example, that somebody I heard using many, many years ago, and it kind of stuck with me. So, like I'm saying, the oneness, overemphasizing that, it's crazy, because we have to have relationships, and we all want relationships, we all want love, and we all want to be loved, we all want to give love, we all want to receive love, like that. So in order to do that, if we accept the principle that we're all one, then we can never experience those loving exchanges, because there's no one to interact with, as we've explained. But likewise, overemphasizing the difference, we shouldn't do that either, because in a relationship with Krishna, there are certain ground rules. And the example that I remember being given is that in this material world, if we run into in a relationship, a very common relationship, of course, would be, say, a husband and wife, partners like that, having a relationship. And if they run into difficulty with their relationship, then they can always go to a marriage counsellor to get help, marriage counselling help. That's what they can do. But in relationship to Krishna, it's not like that. It's not that, if I wake up one day and think, oh, Krishna, it's not fair that I have to get up at, 5 o'clock in the morning, or, whatever the time that you're getting up. But getting up early, to chant Hare Krishna and to engage in sadhana bhakti. And we're thinking, this is unfair, I'd like to sleep more, whatever the case may be. It's not that we enter into a negotiation with Krishna, in that sense, Krishna is absolute, and, if he gives us an instruction like that, then the idea is we follow it, not that we get into a discussion and an argument with him. Okay, so spiritual philosophy, in terms of this dichotomy between what we've just been talking about, overemphasizing the impersonal presentation of oneness, or overemphasizing the difference. This philosophy, spiritual philosophy, it reaches its absolute zenith, its pinnacle, in the concept that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu presented to us 525 years ago, thereabouts, presented to us, and the phrase given to that was Achinta Bheda Tattva, simultaneously one and different. So therefore both have relevance and value, because the whole thing is simultaneously one and different. Prabhupada actually, oftentimes talking about the philosophy of Lord Chaitanya, Achinta Bheda Tattva, he used the phrase unity in diversity. So there is diversity, we're all different, but with that diversity we should seek unity, strive for unity, and not conflict like that. So Lord Chaitanya presented this philosophy, and really that philosophy is considered the absolute pinnacle or peak of the Vaishnava tradition. And we see monism and dualism, they're fully realized as harmonizing aspects of the same truth, this Achinta Bheda Tattva. As I said, it means the inconceivable oneness and difference between God and the living beings. And and as I say, in essence, it includes the essential truths of both Advaita Vedanta, impersonalism, as well as the sense of difference that's presented in Vaishnava philosophy, in the Achinta Bheda Tattva philosophy. And this is interesting because, it's not just coming from India in that sense. This struggle to understand things as they are has been present in many Western thinkers and philosophers. And they came up with the idea, or some of them came up with the idea one time, of unity, unity of opposites, like that. Unity of opposites. And what was I going to say about unity of opposites? I was going to say something else. Sorry, just lost it there. Unity of opposites. In the presentation of the one and the many, that was seen as a contradiction, but has ultimately been kind of settled. But that out of the one, the many, as I say in the West, it's connected. It was connected to a phrase that they came up with. I think a Latin phrase, "E pluribus unum," "E pluribus unum," which I think started from the concept of out of many colonies, one nation. So, they obviously were striving. They could see all the differences. And essentially this all came from Europe, because all the different various European powers had so many different colonies around the world. The Portuguese had an empire, the Spanish had an empire, the French had an empire. I mean, even the Germans and the Dutch had empire. Well, the Dutch had quite a big empire, the Germans smaller maybe, and of course the British had an empire, etc. So there were all these, and they obviously could see all the differences in the cultures around the world, whether it, obviously language, food, anyway, there's so many differences. So they came out with this a pluribus unum, or unum, and it came originally from out of many colonies, one nation. But eventually the phrase grew to include many different national facets, and they changed it then later as out of many peoples, one people. But India and Indian philosophy and the different schools of Indian philosophy, they go further, using that same premise essentially to elaborate on religious inclusion, as it recognizes the great diversity of human understanding in relation to God. And we don't have to go far in our own tradition to know that Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his very early years, seeking answers, etc. like that, he was quite taken by Christian tradition, because at least from his perspective, it was seen as a personalistic philosophy, that God was a person. But anyway, this understanding and this striving for this kind of unity, and one of the many, etc., that was also clearly hinted at in the Rig Veda verse, that truth is one, though the wise refer to it by various names. So again, this point about the ultimate truth being one, but it can be, and Prabhupada talks about that searching for the absolute truth, there are different paths to achieve it. He gives the example of, he gives 3 examples in terms of paths. He talks about, if you want to reach the top of a building, so you want to reach the pinnacle of something, that you can walk up the stairs, or you can get on the escalator, or you can get in the lift. They'll all bring you to the ultimate destination, but some will take longer than others. So walking up the stairs will take longer than the escalator, and getting on the escalator will take longer than the lift, assuming the lift doesn't take too long to arrive. So this idea that there is ultimate truth, but there are different paths to it, and also different expressions of it, and that also goes back to, the point that we shouldn't, necessarily be in any way disparaging, and Prabhupada never was. I think I've talked about this point before, that if you search Prabhupada's lectures, etc., and talks and writings, and you search them all for references to Jesus Christ, given that we live in a Christian country, they are also so respectful, and not just respectful actually, they're also so much in glorification of Jesus Christ, what he did, his message, etc., and what he was trying to achieve. Prabhupada may be less complimentary to Christians themselves, in terms of, because he would see that many of them weren't following the message of Jesus Christ. I mean, the obvious one that comes to mind is the commandments, thou shalt not kill, whereas we meaning that there's my Christian background coming out, whereas Christians will have the tendency to interpret that to mean humans, but Jesus never said humans. Of course, they came from Moses, but endorsed by Jesus. But that nuance was never referred to. Thou shalt not kill humans. It's just thou shalt not kill. So, from a Vaishnava point of view, it's natural to conclude that that's referring to all living entities and not just human beings. So, and also the another example that's given, because this big difference actually, and I think I meant to touch on that earlier and I didn't, and I'm sorry for being a bit going backwards and forwards here. Hope that I'm making some sense. I think I'm making sense to myself at least. But that's the point about difference, not emphasizing too much on the differences, but there are differences, and the main difference that's given by Lord Chaitanya in his Achinta Bheda Bheda Tattva presentation, and also by Srila Prabhupada time and time again, is the one single biggest difference between the Supreme Lord Krishna, or God, and the living entities, us, is that qualitatively we're the same, but quantitatively we're completely different. And that's the problem with the impersonal presentation, that it's trying to present that, yes, if we achieve perfection, when we leave this body, we merge into the Supreme Brahman and we all become one. So therefore, quantitatively, we then become the same as God. And the Krishna conscious philosophy is very clear that will never ever happen and never ever be the case. And the example's given that if you take a drop of water and you chemically analyze the water that comes from a glass of water. I have a glass of water in front of me. I will take a sip of it. So this water, I think there's about half a pint there. So it's a relatively small amount of water. But let's go to the biggest reservoir in Ireland, which I don't know which is the biggest reservoir in Ireland actually. But Blessington Lakes, they're one of they're pretty big. They'll have millions upon millions of pints or litres or gallons or whatever of water in that reservoir. So we take some water from the reservoir and take some water from my glass and chemically analyse them, they will be the same. But quantitatively, they are so different. So different. If I'm told, here Praghosa, this is all the water you have for the rest of your life, I'm going to die very soon. Whereas if I'm told I can have just a fraction of the water that's in the Blessington Reservoir, I will, I'll happily have enough water for the rest of my days. So that's that's probably the most essential difference between the living entities and the Supreme Lord. The quantitative difference like that, because we are all eternal spiritual beings, and the essence of that spirit from a quality point of view is actually the same. So following on from that, then we can see that God, for instance, he's a storehouse, a complete storehouse of wonderful qualities, and the six that are always listed are strength, beauty, wealth, fame, knowledge, and renunciation. Those are the six qualities. So God is bursting at the seams with these qualities. He has them in full like that. Bhagavan is the name for God, who is possessing all of those qualities in complete total like that. We may also have all of those qualities, and certainly some of them. I won't I won't reference myself here, but we certainly have some of them. Whether we all have some knowledge, we all have. I was going to say beauty. I mean that certainly could be contestable. Strength, etc., or whatever, renunciation. We all have some of those qualities, but in minute quantities as it relates to Krishna in terms of his strength. And you just have to read some of Krishna's pastimes to immediately understand. Krishna, when Indra sent the Samvartaka clouds, to inundate Vrindavan. Of course, I'm holding up my wrong hand. Let's go to the right hand. What did Krishna do? He took Govardhan Hill. So Govardhan Hill, I don't know, probably weighs maybe, I don't know, 1 trillion metric tons. I don't know, something massive, And he lifted it with his little finger of his left hand, little finger of his left hand, just lifted Govardhan Hill. So in reality, you know, I don't know, I'm thinking of it, we couldn't get remotely near that. So again, it's all about quality and quantity of the qualities of Krishna like that. So that's the essence of the presentation that I wanted to make. I'll just kind of finish talking about Sankaracharya, because Sankaracharya is a great revered philosopher and spiritualist, and actually is seen in many respects as the origin of, or at least the origin of the revival of impersonalistic philosophy. He very much popularized Advaita Vedanta, or as I say, the impersonal philosophy like that. And he was in, I think, the 9th century like that. And he taught that absolute monism is the highest truth, and that Brahman is ultimately impersonal, and that the incarnations and the avatars, so in that sense, Lord Krishna, the incarnations and avatars are lesser manifestations from the impersonal. And he also taught that the world's illusion, Maya, that it's created by an all-pervasive ignorance that we were talking about earlier, Vidya, and that when this ignorance is banished, then one realizes their natural divinity or oneness with the Supreme. That was the essence of his philosophy. I mean, there are obviously, different variations, etc., and whatever, but that is the essence of the philosophy. There are other stories connected to it that it came about, or Sankaracharya's mission came about, and Prabhupada certainly supports this, so I think it's fair for me to relay it, that when Lord Buddha came into existence, so we're talking like 2,500 years ago, that kind of time frame, maybe a little bit more now, I think 2006, 700 years ago. So when Lord Buddha came, in order for him, he basically saw that people were suffering, and he also saw that they were using the Vedic scriptures as a justification for animal slaughter, for killing animals and eating them. So when he saw that, he was horrified, because this was not right to do that, to justify the slaughter like that. And secondly, he knew that no good would come of it for the people that were doing it. They were just going to really suffer, indefinitely as a result of those practices. So therefore, he had to break that habit that people had. And what he realized was that he would only be able to do that if he could break their faith also in the Vedas, because, in that sense, for centuries and millennia, people were following the Vedas and accepting them. So now if they were using the Vedas to justify wholesale slaughter of animals, it would be very hard just to get them to stop that. So therefore, he broke their faith in the Vedic scriptures full stop, and actually promoted, and that's why we have today, Buddhist philosophy is Voidistic philosophy, which is exactly what Lord Chaitanya came to to reverse. And Srila Prabhupada, as we discussed earlier, is in his pranam mantras to actually defeat voidism and impersonalism. But in that sense, it started with Lord Buddha, who's a completely bona fide incarnation of the Supreme. But that was the reason. Prabhupada gives that as the reason. But then Sankaracharya came, as we said, in the 9th century, so roughly, I guess, is it round about halfway between Lord Buddha coming and Lord Chaitanya coming. In the middle, you had Sankaracharya. And Sankaracharya wanted to re-establish people's faith in the Vedas, in the Vedic scriptures. But because Lord Buddha had been so successful, that was also difficult for Sankaracharya to achieve. So what he actually did was, he managed it by presenting half of the picture, if you like, that God, except the Vedas, but God's impersonal. He wasn't able to bring them to the full understanding like that. And there's a very well-known reference from his work, the Viveka Chudamani, where he, it's a verse, Brahma Satyam Jagat. I actually should have looked at it before, but basically it's saying that Brahman is the only truth, and that the world is unreal, and ultimately there's no difference between Brahman and the individual self, as we've been discussing. And actually, because of that work, the Viveka Chudamani, that became a real inspiration for Vaishnav schools of thought, and they were formally structured, these thoughts, as a response or a riposte or a challenge to the philosophy presented by Sankaracharya. Ramanujacharya's Vivistaveta, qualified non-dualism, again. And actually, so anyway, so that was Ramanujacharya. So he came out with the treatise, if you like, the qualified non-dualism, and Madhvacharya's Dvaita dualism. He came out with that, and then Vallabhacharya also his Sudavaita, pure non-dualism. And it's interesting that all of those titles have the word Advaita in them, and that was because of Sankaracharya. So all these great, wonderful Vaishnava legends, I think we can use the word, like Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, Vallabhacharya, etc. They all came because this was such a concern. And of course they all saw it as a continuum from Lord Buddha right up to Lord Chaitanya. The whole idea was, and beyond Lord Chaitanya in that sense, now it's come to the Western world, the whole idea is to give the full picture, the full understanding of spiritual knowledge and what the ultimate reality is that yes, we are all eternal spiritual souls. Yes, we are all part of the Brahman. We are all Brahman in that sense. But over and above that, we're also personal living beings, and God, Krishna, is a personal living being like that. And the ultimate realization is to understand that relationship of pure bliss with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And these devotees like Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, etc., they understood this, and that therefore, and first it pained them greatly that their cherished, beloved Lord, that they have a relationship with. The nice verse in Bhagavad Gita 9.2, Rajavidya Rajaguyam, Pavitramadam Uttamam Pachakchivagamam Damyam Susukam Kartamavyayam. That, understanding this, that you get direct perception of who you are by realization once you engage in the loving service of the Lord. So these devotees like Ramanujacharya and Madhvacharya, they had that relationship, that incredible loving relationship with the Supreme Lord. So it was so painful for them to hear philosophies like Sankaracharya's and other people who were following that philosophy. So painful to them personally because of their own realization and experience. But then also out of their compassionate nature, it was so painful that people were following this path that was not going to bring them the happiness that they ultimately desire and arguably ultimately deserve like that. So that's why they came up with all these different presentations on what the real conclusion is. And actually, these are subtleties that are missed. I mean, they will certainly be missed by me also, and I really thank different devotees over the years who you would discuss these things with and understand these things better. But in that work by Sankaracharya, his Viveka Chudamani, he actually also gets into this. That's the interesting thing. He outlines two levels of Brahman. Saguna Brahman, so Brahman with qualities, and Nirguna Brahman, Brahman without qualities. So we have no dispute, ultimately we actually have no dispute with that. And that the Saguna, absolute presentation of Brahman is a personal God with attributes and qualities, whereas the Nirguna is without qualities, and ultimately then, because it has no qualities, is impersonal. So Vaishnavas acknowledge both aspects. We don't say that there isn't an impersonal aspect to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Actually, in our own lives, we witness it every single day in the context of, just looking at the time here, because maybe I'm going longer than I should, I'm coming close to my time, sorry, so I'll try to finish quickly. We can experience that impersonal aspect every day of our lives in the form of time. Every day that passes, every hour that passes, etc., we come closer to death. So how impersonal is that? Just time, just this ticking clock. Actually, you don't even need a ticking clock. You can be clockless, and time still progresses like that. So we don't say that God doesn't have an impersonal aspect. We just say that isn't the ultimate aspect of God. And of course, Krishna confirms this himself in the Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, Aham Savasya Prabhuvo. I am the source of all spiritual material worlds. Lord Brahma himself, which of course is where the word Brahman is coming from, if you like, or where his name's coming from, etc., the interconnection between those two. So Lord Brahma himself says, Ishvara Parama Krishna, that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then also Srimad Bhagavatam tells us, Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam, that Krishna is supreme like that. So, And actually, it's interesting as well because those for devotees of Krishna, there are 3 levels of realization. So there's the Brahman realization and the impersonal Brahma Jyoti, like that. That's one level, and that's impersonalism. But then there's the Paramatma realization, understanding that Krishna enters each and every atom, and Krishna's sitting in our hearts like that. This localized aspect of Krishna. So the Brahman aspect is considered the fundamental, rudimentary, basic aspect or understanding of Krishna in terms of the absolute spiritual aspect. It's the rudimentary, fundamental aspect. And then the second level is this understanding of Krishna as Paramatma, as sitting in our hearts, not just our hearts, but actually enters every single atom. But then the ultimate realization is Krishna as a person in his own world, Goloka Vrindavan, engaged in all his own activities. All the other things, they're all happening simultaneously, but they're totally separate from Krishna too. They're simultaneously one and different. They're, again, Achinta Bheda Bheda Tattva, that they're connected to Krishna, but Krishna, in his ultimate manifestation in the spiritual world and engaging in all his loving exchanges with his eternal servants, is a totally different thing. It's totally separate from all of that, like that. So that Bhagavan realization is considered, again, to use that word, pinnacle or zenith of spiritual attainment, where why? Because one actually develops a loving relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, where you can then realize the combination of eternality and knowledge, because that's the thing. You have the different forms of yoga, so you have the, Jnana yogis like that, and you have the karma yogis, etc. So you've yogis seeking knowledge, yogis seeking action, but then you've bhakti yogis, and the bhakti yogis are seeking ultimately just pure surrender to Krishna and a loving relationship, like that. So there's all these different aspects, and it's interesting that relationship, once you've developed that relationship, where you have awareness of all of those things, you've awareness of the karma yogis, the jnana yogis, etc. The bhakti yogis have awareness of all of that, but they engage in that loving relationship, and as I've said many times, it's an amazing thing. For me, at least, it's an amazing thing that we understand that once you go back to the spiritual world and you have your loving relationship with Krishna and you're engaged like that, that it's just pure bliss, complete and total. Om Purnama Daha Purnamidam. Complete and total. Yet at the same time, it increases at every moment. The bliss and the ecstasy increases at every moment of Aitamachuttamanadim Rupam. So these levels of 3 levels of God realization, they're actually presented as hierarchical, with progressively greater dimensions of insight accruing for the followers of each, like that. So you can graduate from the Brahman to the Paramatma to the Bhagavan. We'll find that each level contains and encompasses the prior one, so you're not losing out. But it means that the third and final level of Bhagavan realization is the most comprehensive of all 3, like that. Okay, so I think I do have to finish. There was actually some quotes that I just wanted to. One was from Sri Vatsa Goswami that I wanted to, and I will read it actually, just so that I don't make a mess of it. Just bear with me. I think I have it here. But nice to finish on some. Oh, by the way, actually, as well, the whole thing about the 3 levels, they're connected also to what Prabhupada presented so many times about thinking, feeling, and willing. The thinking is relating to gyan, or knowledge, and ultimately the impersonal kind of thing. That's what that's relating to. Thinking, feeling. Feeling is connected to... let me do the other one first, actually. The willing is connected to action. And then feeling, because it's an interesting thing, and it goes back to the point about religion without philosophy and philosophy without religion. Feeling is something that we can never deny, and we shouldn't want to deny, course, on its own, it can hinder us because we just think everything is feelings and whatever. But feelings are very, very important in relation to relationships again. But anyway, let me finish with the references. So this one is from Srivatsa Goswami, who is a great Vaishnava saint and scholar. And he wrote, if one's point of departure is cognitive or indifferent, the ultimate reality, actually, sorry, I'm struggling to read that. If one's point of departure is cognitive or indifferent, the ultimate reality of the absolute is undifferentiated consciousness. The cognitive path is recognized by the Advaita Vedanta of Sankara, where we are ultimate reality, Brahman. If one's approach is conative, based on action, then the end to be attained subjectively is Paramatma, the supreme innermost being of all beings. But if one's approach is affective, reality becomes manifest in the fullest form of all as Bhagavan, the supreme personality of Godhead. So therefore, Vaishnavas, they argue on the basis of what Srivatsa Goswami has just presented. They argue that the notion of oneness with God is only preliminary and it's subservient to Paramatma and Bhagavan realization, and that ultimately one must realize the virtue of devotion to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then, my last quote will be from Madhvacharya, who we referenced a little bit earlier. The Supreme Person, and Madhvacharya, in that sense, he has his own sampradaya, an extraordinary personality. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the foundation upon which everything rests. O individual spirit soul, you are simply a reflection of that Godhead. Only one moon shines in the sky, although innumerable reflections of that moon may appear in the water or in other places. Lovely analogy, this is so poetic, but let me just read that again. There is only one moon shines in the sky, although innumerable reflections of that moon may appear in the water or in other places. O individual spirit soul, the Supreme Person. O individual spirit soul, of course, when Madhvacharya is speaking, he's talking about you and me. So, O individual spirit soul, the Supreme Person is like that single original moon, and the individual spirit souls are like innumerable reflections of him. Just as the reflections remain always distinct from the moon itself, in the same way the individual spirit souls remain eternally different from their original source, which is completely, dismantling the argument that we merge and become God. Just completely dismantling that. The Supreme Person... Sorry, let me read that again. Let me read that again, because I stopped halfway sentence because it hit me as so important. But let me just read it. Just as the reflections remain always distinct from the moon itself, in the same way, the individual spirit souls remain eternally different from their original source, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. O individual spirit soul, this is the eternal distinction. And of course, eternal means it's constitutional and it can never be changed. O individual spirit soul, this is the eternal distinction between you and the Supreme. So there it is in an actual... in a nutshell. And there's that dictum, again, I'm not sure if it's a source, but it's just popped into my mind, that Vaishnavas will say, I want to taste sugar, but I don't want to be sugar. So like that, God is the sugar and we can taste God, but we can never be God. I think I'll finish on that point. I think that's a good point to finish on. That God's the sugar and God is so kind and so merciful and so loving that we can actually taste that sugar, but we can never be the sugar. And the other thing is, no matter how many times we taste sugar, and no matter how many times all the living entities that exist taste the sugar again, going back to that verse, Om Purnam Adaha Purnamidam, Krishna is complete Even when you take something from Krishna, he remains complete like that. So yeah, let's all be grateful that we've been given the opportunity to understand these different levels of realization of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that as followers of Srila Prabhupada, we very much are focusing on developing our understanding more and more of Krishna as an individual person, and then developing a relationship with him. Okay, I think my time's up, and I don't think any questions came in. I'm not sure how we work this system in terms of, because normally if we're sitting down in the temple, we'll ask for questions and people can put their hands up. I didn't particularly ask for questions. Maybe I should have done that at the beginning. But I think ultimately, I'm thinking that I probably can't hold everybody up in their with their day, and sort of sit here online waiting for questions, etc. Maybe if there are any questions, that they can be posted on the Dublin Facebook page, and hopefully I'll get a chance to look at them later and answer them as best I can. Okay, thank you all very, very much. Apologies again for any and all of the technical hitches. And I wish you all well in these really, really curious times. And we'll touch base again soon. Okay, thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki